Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Around the Big Ten podcast. I am Mark Givler. Chip Minnick here with me as always. We are continuing our Big Ten capsules, our pre-spring look at every Big Ten school, 3 topics of interest, major questions, however you want to put it, for these Big Ten programs heading into spring practice, many of which are starting here in about 2 weeks. Up now we have Indiana, which I think is one of the more interesting ones to talk about, given the season they just had kind of out of nowhere. Curt Cignetti, unbelievable first year in Bloomington, playoff berth, what was it, 11 wins, I think?
Yep.
11 and 2. Wow. Really one of the surprises in college football last year. Can they keep this going? That's not one of our 3 questions, but it's a very broad, I think way to put it. Can they keep this going? So let's start with our first thing. They had a lot of success in the portal last year. A large part of that was Cignetti being able to bring in some of his guys from James Madison. That's not really your typical portal addition. You talk about, those guys would have been more comfortable with what Cignetti was doing in Indiana than the players who had been in Indiana. So that was a very easy transition. But they did go and get Curtis Rourke to quarterback the whole thing from Ohio University. Now they've gone and they've picked Fernando Mendoza out from Cal, out of the transfer portal. This is actually probably a bigger name coming in than Rourke was. I think those of us who live in Ohio, knew Curtis Rourke was pretty good. But from a national perspective, I think Mendoza's actually got a little more juice to his name. Can he have, Chip, the same impact that Curtis Rourke did for this Indiana offense?
I'm kind of skeptical in the sense that, like you said, when it comes to Curtis Rourke, just seeing what he did at OU and then it transferred over to Indiana and the mobility. And I just think with Fernando Mendoza, it's a different skill set. He's a bigger guy, 6'5". And again, he has, I think, a little bit more juice nationally, coming from Cal, but I think offensively, it's going to be interesting to see what Indiana does to build around Mendoza's skill set versus what they did with Curtis Rourke.
Yeah, I agree in that sense. And how are they going to kind of marry this, this style into what they want to do? Look, this was a big pickup though. He was one of the highest rated quarterbacks in the portal. Maybe arguably number 1. This was not the same portal quarterback class that we saw a year ago, when we saw Dylan Gabriel and Cam Ward, and there were not as many big name quarterbacks in the portal this year. Last year was the ultimate portal QB class, guys who went on to be instant impact players as seniors, all the way down to former 5-stars moving around, like Dante Moore moved to Oregon. There was so much that happened in the portal last year. So it's not quite an apples to apples comparison here, but Mendoza was still kind of the cream of the crop here. And he's got multiple years left, which I think is, obviously very good for Indiana. He's not coming in as a 1-year rental. He's got 2 years of starting experience. From freshman to sophomore year, the touchdowns went up, the interceptions went down. Despite 140 more pass attempts, the interceptions were almost cut in half. The rating was up. Everything was up for Mendoza. He had a very, very sophomore year, completed almost 70% of his passes, 68.7% of his passes, 3,000 yards. Now, this will kind of move in. We're going to talk about this in a minute, so it's kind of going to be a nice segue. Sacked 41 times. Indiana's got to protect him better than that, right? This, don't you
Absolutely.
think the added protection, if he continues his development, this on paper, this looks very good.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I think the skill set that he brings in comparison to Curtis Rourke is different. He obviously, the talent is there, but it's going to be for Indiana to reap the benefits of a talented player like Fernando Mendoza at the quarterback position. They have to protect him better than what he had previously, in his experience at Cal.
Yeah, you definitely you really kind of put the nail on it here. Now, here's the interesting thing. Like, here's what gives me some hope. Curtis Rourke was used significantly as a runner at OU. Mm-hmm. Nearly 1,000 yards rushing in his career at OU. Last year, Indiana did not use that as much. Now, he was injured. I think that was part of it. Mm-hmm. He was battling injuries during the season. I think their biggest thing was like, we can't lose this guy. Like,
right.
Things go into the tank if we lose this guy. So let's keep him upright. So I think that will help them a little bit. The fact that they kind of limited his running last year compared to what it was at OU. But you are right. Mendoza does not bring the same level of athleticism that Rourke did. And so I think Rourke's athleticism probably showed up more last year in avoiding the sack versus, picking up big yards. Again, his rushing opportunities were down versus what they were at OU when he was pretty much asked to do everything. Here's the other thing, like Mendoza's experienced. I mean, he started every game, I believe, last year for Cal, had starts under his belt as a freshman, but not quite as experienced as Rourke. Curtis Rourke was playing college football in 2019, folks. This was Curtis Rourke's 6th year of college football. And he played to some degree in all 6 of those years. So you are replacing a little bit of experience. How quickly, again, as you mentioned, with how are they going to marry this? How quickly can Mendoza pick things up? That's going to be a big key for them because so much of what they did last year was based on getting really good quarterback play. Like Curtis Rourke, 69.4% completion percentage, 3,042 yards. And here's the kicker, 29 well, first of all, 9.5 yards per attempt. So they were explosive in the passing game last year. 29 touchdowns, 5 interceptions from Rourke.
Yeah, I mean,
like as I read that off to myself, I'm hearing you say like I'm skeptical if he can duplicate. Like that is hard to duplicate. That's gonna be really hard to duplicate.
That's exactly it. And kind of one of the things that you said at the onset of talking about Indiana is kind of atypical about the James Madison additions. And I realize we're talking about the quarterback position. What I guess as an outsider looking at Indiana, I thought, that was done primarily because, all right, these were guys that played for Curt Cignetti. They knew how he operated. They knew what the expectations would be. So I looked at it more of, these guys are coming in and they can hit the ground running and have a better assimilation into what Curt Cignetti wanted to build at Indiana. Now, Curtis Rourke obviously was not part of that. He came from OU. So I guess part of my skepticism is rooted in the fact that, here's another guy that not only, he has no previous association with what Indiana did, but his skill set is different than his predecessor. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just how is Curt Cignetti and his coaches how are they going to develop that? And the fact that, kind of going back to my James Madison point is that, I think that the compliment I would give to Curt Cignetti is again, he was able to get buy-in from the players that did remain at Indiana, as well as the players that came over from James Madison, which I think, the results spoke for themselves. The fact that they won 11 games defied expectations. Can you do that again in year 2 with a completely different quarterback with a completely different skill set?
Yeah, I think, the simple answer, and it's not a simple solution necessarily, but I think the simple way to put it is they probably got like a 9 out of 10 in quarterback play last year, or close to it. If they can get a 7.5 to 8.5 out of 10 this year, which I think they can. It may not be a 9, but it could be an 8. That just means you're going to have to get a little bit more from some other guys, like some other positions. Maybe you only got a 5 out of 10 from whatever position last year. You're going to need a 6 or a 7 this year. Like they're going to have to, I think, pick things up as a team and maybe some other areas. And we'll get to that in a minute because we're also going to talk about that. But I think that's going to be the key is maybe not like banking on 29 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 9.5 yards per attempt, and understanding that we're going to have to offensively get things done. Maybe get a little extra from some other guys. Again, that brings us to our next thing though. Rebuilding the offensive line with some transfers. Will those guys gel? This is an issue a lot of Big Ten teams are facing. We talked about it with Oregon. We're going to talk about it with Ohio State. This isn't a unique problem for Indiana. It's the nature of the sport right now. When you bring in new offensive linemen, how quickly are they going to adjust to your scheme, pick things up and gel as a unit? Chip, what's your concern level here? I mean, we're concerned enough that we're talking about it, but like, what is this like? Is this like a yellow alert, orange alert, red alert? Like, where would you kind of fall on this?
I'd say right now, I'd put it at yellow, because that's the. I'm not trying to dismiss it entirely. That's the beauty of spring practice. That's what that's what summer and fall camp is all about. Developing that cohesiveness and chemistry and getting used to everyone. The fact that they brought in a name that's very familiar to Ohio State fans, Zen Michalski, is one of those offensive linemen that they brought in. Another one that they are bringing in from Notre Dame, Pat Coogan at tackle. So it's just a matter of getting players assimilated into. I keep going back to it. The way that Cignetti wants to run the team, run the offense, getting everyone comfortable and knowing exactly what their roles and responsibilities are. So I would. That's why I'm going to go at the lowest level, that yellow. But it's just one of these things where that's like everyone has to stay healthy and everyone has to kind of blend and meld, and that's what spring and summer is all about.
Yeah. Again, Zen Michalski coming in, Khalil Benson coming in from Colorado. I think Pat Coogan's their biggest pickup. Notre Dame had some random stuff going on the O-line this year where they ended up having essentially 3 backups starting in the title game, and then those guys are coming back from injuries, and so there was all sorts of uncertainty for some of the guys who actually helped Notre Dame get to the national championship game on the offensive line. And so we saw some of those guys transfer out because the original starters are coming back. And so Indiana benefits here with Pat Coogan. I think that's a big one. Zen Michalski's interesting. Again, in-state kid, was played for a few years at Ohio State, didn't get a lot of opportunity there, got thrown into a kind of a tough spot mid-season. That did not go well.
No.
But now you've got a whole off season. Like I think, judging him on that was kind of, I think that's an incomplete grade. I think, given a whole off season where he's, he knows he's the starter, or he knows he's in the mix, versus last year where it's like, yeah, you're not starting over Josh Simmons, who's probably going to be a first round pick, certainly going to be a first 2-round pick, is a different scenario for him. So yeah, I'm optimistic about their offensive line. In terms of being able to keep Mendoza upright. I think the biggest gains are going to have to be in the run game, and we'll get into that, which I think is another good transition here. Is like, okay, transfer portal additions, and they've got a lot of guys on defense we're going to talk about. I'd even argue to throw out some offensive guys here too, though. Like, where are the instant impact guys through the portal for Indiana? Again, we can start this on defense because I think that's where a lot of the questions are. But, just as you look at this group they've put together, who do you kind of see either making the early impact or needing to make the early impact?
Well, I mean, let's face it, the Big Ten, for all of the different kinds of offenses, it's, the game is won and lost in the trenches, and I don't care, that's just the nature of football overall. So when I look at, the transfer portal additions that Indiana had, because for the second straight year, they were very active and very selective in terms of what they wanted to do. I would probably say, like a player that I'm going to be kind of interested, keeping my eyes and ears out for when you start hearing about news around the Big Ten, Dominique Ratcliffe, a defensive lineman from Texas State. He's listed at 6'3", 285. Just one of these guys that, again, on the defensive line, you need to, when you're lining up, I don't care, who you're playing against in the Big Ten, you need to be able to shut down the run. You need to be able to rush the passer. So that would be a guy on the defensive side that I'd be keeping an eye and ear out for.
Yeah. And so I like what they did in the secondary.
Right. They did a lot in the secondary too.
Rylan Gandy from Pitt is a guy who I think will come in and give them an immediate jolt in the secondary. I also like the kid they brought in from NC State, Devin Boykin. So that's two kind of instant impact guys for me in the secondary. So I like what they did there. To kind of marry this all together with what we've talked about with like the offense and getting things from other guys. I do like what they did on the offensive side too, though. Like, I think Roman Hemby is a huge pickup for them. He is a bell cow back. I think they can get a lot out of him, a lot of touches. I think that helps them in terms of, again, how do you keep Fernando Mendoza upright? Make sure that this is an easy transition for him while supporting him with a running game would be a tremendous start. And I've been a big like fan of Roman Hemby's game from his time at Maryland. So I think that was a big one as well. I think again, when you talk about the portal here, they've had to do it again because this is the tricky thing about the portal. Once you go like big on the portal one year, and it made total sense why Indiana had to last year.
Right.
Anytime there's a coaching change, you're going to have like big portal numbers. You just are. Guys are going to leave. The new coaching staff's going to want to bring in some of their guys and find some other guys that fit their system better. But it's hard to break the cycle because what you're doing is you're bringing in a bunch of 1-year guys mostly, and then you've got to do it again next year because you can't sign 50 high school players. It's just not a thing that makes any sense to anybody. So like you're now, how do you break the cycle a little bit? I think they've done a good job here. Like they've brought in impact guys, but it's not like they've brought in like 40 transfers. Like I think they've done a good job here of like balancing high school recruiting with the portal. This is kind of a weird way to put it, but you almost have to wean yourself off the portal. You can't quit the portal cold turkey, or else you're gonna have a huge roster issue, a huge roster balance problem. So you always have to wean yourself off the transfer portal. And I think they did a good job this offseason in taking that first step of doing that while getting some impact guys.
Yeah, I mean, my perception of Indiana football recruiting, I'm just thinking over like the past like 30, 40 years, is that what they've usually tried to do. And again, I'm going back, to when I, was a teenager. I'm thinking that, Indiana, they recognize the fact they're not going to be able to get all the superstar guys from Ohio, but they would just geographically, like down in Cincinnati, so like a lot of the guys that would be in the Cincinnati area, like that kind of obviously within their own state, but also recognizing the fact that, all right, Indiana is not necessarily known as a hotbed for football. So, I mean, they have to be willing to branch out, which nowadays, that's quite common with any Big Ten program. You're right. I mean, you can't build your program exclusively on the transfer portal, because all it does is just puts you back to square one automatically the following year. So it's a challenging balancing act, but I really do believe that the tremendous debut season that Curt Cignetti had has them situated well with, obviously, in terms of, I'm sure that a lot of the high school talent is going to be a lot more receptive to listening to what Curt Cignetti has to say. And by the same token, a lot of the transfer portal players are interested in an opportunity to play for what is now a winning program.
And I think big picture here, I know this isn't really a big picture podcast. It's kind of like the spring stuff, but big picture here, I think Curt Cignetti is the right guy at the right time as well, because what's happening is, first of all, he's a very good coach, but what's happening here is the era of NIL is going to actually help Indiana. I don't think people fully understand that this is a school that does have a lot of resources. And historically, those resources have went almost entirely to basketball. Right. Well, that's changing. Yes. And when you put up an 11-win season, it encourages it to change. So they're putting more resources into their football program. And this is happening at a time simultaneously when the dynamics at Indiana high school football recruiting are changing in terms of there's more talent in the state on the football side of things now than there was 20 years ago.
Right.
Like there's a lot more. And why is that happening? Is it demographic shifts? I don't think it's so much demographic shifts. I think it's a mindset shift. I think what's happening a lot in Indiana is the kids who used to think they were 6'5" or 6'6" power forwards are now playing football. Like DeJuan Jones, who goes to Ohio State, was a really good high school basketball player. I really think 20 years ago, DeJuan Jones goes and plays like some mid-major basketball league and doesn't even, play football at the next level. And now he's in the NFL. Like, I think there's a lot of that going on where the hoop dreams are a little more realistic amongst the high school players than they used to be. And guys are playing multiple sports and realizing like, look, yeah, I'm probably not going to be a 6'6" NBA power forward. Maybe I can be a 6'6" defensive end or a 6'6" offensive tackle. Or I'm probably not a 5'11" point guard, but I can be a 5'11" corner. Like, I think there's a lot of that has happened in Indiana, and I think it's been to the benefit of the athletes, and certainly I think is going to be to the benefit of the Indiana football program. So these are all, like I said, things are like the stars are kind of aligning here for Indiana to kind of have its golden age, I guess, of football, I think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I was referencing, when I was younger, kind of what I considered
just like 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Back in the late 2000s.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Like with, like Bill Mallory, I do remember, I do remember, when Earl Bruce said, like Darkest Day. And I, like that was when, for example, Indiana, kind of what I was saying is like Bill Mallory, a former Woody Hayes assistant, like the idea of like, okay, well, we want to be a physical team. And they were, back then that was kind of it. And no disrespect to any of the people who came after Bill Mallory, the number of different coaching, cycles, for better or for worse. But I truly believe that Curt Cignetti, obviously, he's very brash. He's very confident. But I agree with you. I think that he is well positioned to capitalize upon this moment in time with NIL, with the transfer portal, all these kind of things. Like the stories that came out about when he was an assistant on Nick Saban's staff, he never lacked confidence. And I realized that there are a number of people that probably, that he rubs the wrong way. But for me, I like the fact that he is coming in there and kind of saying like, we are not going to just basically like lay over and die for other programs within the Big Ten, that he basically was serving notice to the rest of the conference. Like we are here to compete and play for championships. Now, granted, there are, some people that can say, oh, that, like was kind of, maybe a fluke. Here's an opportunity this in year 2. And again, we'll have a better understanding after the spring, and we kind of start looking at like how it looked, and we can do our schedule analysis. But I really do believe that Indiana is going to be one of those teams that, if not necessarily, competing for the conference championship, is going to be one of those teams that's going to be in the thick of it throughout the rest of the 2025 season.
Yep. So looks like an exciting, look, I think probably the most highly anticipated Indiana football season in
easily.
Like ever. like because no one saw it coming. Like even Indiana fans last year were surprised. So like,
right.
It's not like they went into last year like, oh, we're going to win 11 games and go to the playoff. Like, so like now that they've done it, like now it's like,
yep.
The expectations and the excitement level around the program is just like all-time high. So this will be a fun team to cover this offseason and see if they can do it again. But that's our time for this one. We're going to have more coming. Again, check us out, youtube.com/@SaturdayGlory for all of these. You can also find us now on all of your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, like wherever you get your podcasts, we're on there now. Just search Around the Big Ten and give us a subscribe there if you'd like to listen versus watch. And also, if you leave us a 5-star rating, that actually really helps us. It helps other college football fans, Big Ten football fans especially, find us and get to watch the content, watch and listen to the content. So appreciate everyone watching, appreciate everyone listening, and we'll be back here soon with another one.